the question, are amps dead? I think, of course, the real point to this is that there are still people using amplifiers, but are there still people buying amps that are new designs? Are there still people actively going out to guitar shops and buying amplifiers? Are your local guitar shops still stocking amplifiers like they were 15 years ago? I can remember Project Music used to have a healthy selection of Mesa Boogie amplifiers. They now don't bother with like any expensive amps. They have like a few like Fenders and practice amps and, you know, like a few Black Star amps and bits and pieces like that, but nothing like, you know, when I was a kid. So are amps dead altogether? No. Are the trends looking good for amp manufacturers? I'd say also no.
This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Okay, so Nick Granville brought up my video, a rep video, and a couple of other guys on a video kind of asking about whether amps are dead and what that might mean. And I think you should go check out his video. Nick does daily videos. I think he's done it for about 3/4 of a year, maybe nearly getting up to a year now. And is a professional kind of musician. You've probably heard of him and you've probably seen some of his stuff. So I think he basically does similar, probably at a higher level than me, where it's like a mixture of kind of jazz, fusion-y, and kind of normal function gigs. And I think that's an important thing to note, that this guy is a working guitarist. And similarly, I think Rhett Scholl, I'm not sure that he does like the dodgy side of wedding gigs and stuff like that, but he is a touring musician, right, with Noah. And yeah, so I think the context for my initial video was that I was watching that pedal show and they did a video on the best amp ever, the Deluxe Reverb, and I was like, that is an amazing amp and you get some amazing tones out of it. But I noticed that in the video that especially kind of what was happening was that they were talking about this silent stage thing, and I kind of did a video kind of like about the reality of the working life of a guitarist in 2024. So I think the key really is working, that if you're going to be out getting paid to play gigs, that's really where this silent stage thing starts to become an issue. Now there are of course plenty of gigs going on where that's not an issue, a pub gig, a club gig, jazz gigs, right? However, right, the reason that I focused personally on function gigs is because those are where you can make a little bit of a living, right? So, for instance, Friday night I was playing a pub gig with my good buddy Jake Loosemore. Jake Loosemore Trio in Lime Regis, the Ship Inn. Great fun. And actually one of the better kind of gigs around here, where you get fed, free drinks and all that sort of stuff. Got offered a room, and we got £110 each for 4 of us, which is pretty reasonable for a pub gig. I don't think around here you ever really get more than that per head. Obviously if they did it as just a trio they'd have had a bit more, but we're talking sort of £100, £150. If you went in there solo, maybe you could get a bit more than that. But pub gigs and club gigs, that tends to be, I think, around the sort of money you get paid here. Now, conversely, if you do function gigs and wedding gigs, you can be thinking about double that essentially, right? And that is the reason that people kind of focus, I think, on wedding gigs. And so there was a guy that Nick kind of flashed up on the screen that was asking, should we believe guys on YouTube when they're talking about kind of this amps are dead thing, which kind of I put as a jokey title anyway. But the question is, like, should you believe someone who's making YouTube videos in the week and then playing function gigs on the weekend? Well, that is the life of, you know, a working musician who's kind of diversified to be able to actually make a living, right? I think it's really, really difficult to make a living in the jazz and blues scene unless you're going to be out like every night playing at a pub or a club, which isn't that conducive to like family life and that sort of thing. So before lockdown, I did quite a lot more jazz gigs and a lot more kind of, you know, the fusiony type gigs. I started turning them down specifically because it wasn't really worth the time and money. Like, those gigs take a lot of prep, they take quite a lot of travel money, and then at the end of it, like, you get maybe between 50 and 100 quid for what is essentially a lot of work. So that's the reason that I don't do those types of gigs that often anymore, unless it's with a really good friend. And so the point really is that if you're going to be working and making like an okay living playing music, then you need to get along with lots of different situations. And that really was the point in my video, like being wedded to the idea that you're going to be able to play a deluxe reverb even on 2 or 3 is actually not realistic if you're going to be working at all, right? Because there are a bunch of gigs where you're going to get a sound guy that's going to come up to you and say that's too loud. Literally, this silent stage thing is taken over, and that's what John Suhr talks about in his comment, where he said, the big issue to me is the silent stage. Unless you are playing in an arena, it matters. You can't hear guitar until you get to the mixing board. Guitars are lost. The first half of the club hears drums and bass. I've heard my favourite players go from amps to modelers with a quiet stage, and it's just neutered, essentially, I think is what he meant. More and more players are realising this. I also find modelers make all players sound the same. For the record, I have 4 modelers and only use one to get ideas down. Personally, I wouldn't use it live in a guitar-centric band. So that's John Suhr, and that's a totally valid kind of point. And I think it's definitely true for me, where the best experiences that I have playing with a modeler are when I have some amount of stage volume with like the Fender FR12. Now, if you take stage volumes down altogether, I totally agree it's not that fun, but it is basically what you might need to, if you're, and I guess this is why I make this kind of video, because it's more like what real life might be for people watching this. And I think it's important to get across, like, the days of running a Marshall even on 3 or 4, like a Plexi, running a deluxe reverb on 9, it's just not going to get you very far. You're going to have a lot of arguments, because my buddy Jake is, you know, getting week in, week out told to bring volumes down when he's just got a Suhr Bella on like 2 if he's pushing it there. And I think this is another thing to bear in mind, is that, so I was gigging with Jake and he had his Suhr Bella on about 2, and I've got the Matchless Lightning clone, which is like a 15-20 watt amp. And it's basically, if you're playing with another guitarist who has like plenty of volume, it's not that dissimilar to playing like with a modeler, I find, where you can't hear yourself. Particularly, all those same problems occur where it's like, well, I went in for a solo and I don't think people could hear me. That definitely happened because Jake, for the second half, he'd turned up the volume on his Landau distortion, and that basically meant that then when he was like playing rhythm stuff behind the solo, that was like about a similar volume to where my solo was. So it's definitely true that you need to be, I think, ideally boosted like significantly above whatever the volume of everything else is for your solo to be heard and for it to have power and punch and stuff. And in a 2 guitar band, when one guy has an amp that kind of overpowers the other, you have all those same problems that you get when you're using a modeler, I find anyway. So it's a bit of a, so for the next gig that I do with Jake, do I take a more powerful amp? And then we have that like arms race thing going on. And I can totally get why people are like, well, we don't really want to get into that, and keeping the stage volume lower is actually more of a priority than you two guys having like loads of fun playing with your amps, like pretty loud. It wasn't crazy loud, but certainly nowhere near like a deluxe reverb on 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9.
Is anyone else deaf? So I really fucking rock musician, don't take the risk.
And I totally understand why it is that the stage volumes, they want to keep those down, to really kind of keep this thing in check, where I think for a while guitarists kind of were saying, you know, I have to be playing at this volume for it to work, and maybe those volumes were unrealistic. And now I think us guitarists today are kind of paying a little bit of the penalty for sins of guitarists past. I feel that that's what it is to me. So are amps dead? Not totally. Like, there are situations where you can use them, but you know, I got messages from like Martin from Sophie Ellis Bextor used to play with, and Mika, and like he was saying, you know, you can't be playing at those kind of volumes, and he was saying that you're not even there for sound check, for example, and whatever is decided at sound check, if you go back and change that, you're going to get told off. So I think it's kind of the reality of touring guitar, making money playing guitar and all that sort of stuff is a little bit different to this idea where you can be a total purist and you've got total control over how loud your volumes are going to be. Yeah, so that was just some thoughts on it, really. Like, should you believe a guy in a bedroom playing guitar who gigs on the weekends? Well, that's probably someone who's going to be somewhat close to what your real life experience might also be, right? The only difference is that they're making videos in their bedroom. The gig on the weekend is probably quite similar to yours, and that's definitely the case for me. You know, if you're playing in a function band, I bet we're probably playing a lot of the same tunes a lot of the time. I think that's kind of the nice thing about it, to be honest, was like, actually, most of us aren't Joe Bonamassa, most of us aren't Eric Johnson. We have to be more realistic about what we can do, and at the moment the trend towards the silent stage is a real thing, and I think real amp manufacturers are definitely suffering because you see loads of comments from people that have switched to modelers, the working guitarist, where it's just like, well, if I want to get gigs, I need to be able to do this, and you get used to playing without an amp to some extent. It's nowhere near as fun, in my opinion, but it's kind of just what it is. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cheers, Nick. Cheers, John Suhr. For leaving thoughtful comments on these kind of things, and I think there are still people making amps, but that I feel like it's such a niche of a niche now where, yeah, it must be hard. Like, amp prices are necessarily going up because it's becoming more and more of a boutique thing, I think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.